Yes, my name is Eloy Rodriguez from Beeville, Texas.
Okay, and where exactly is Bevo?
Beeville is between San Antonio and Corpus Christi, 60 miles north of Corpus, 90 miles south of San Antonio.
Okay. So is that where you like? Is that where you were born?
Born and raised.
Okay. I'm under the understanding you were in the Vietnam War, right?
Yes.
What year did you enlist?
I got there. I enlisted in the military on April the 14th, 1966. I went to Vietnam on September the 16th, 1967, and returned on October the 5th, 1968.
And what made you really want to enlist in the war?
Well, back then they had the draft, and if you weren't going to school, you weren't going to college, or if you weren't married, you were very much eligible for the draft, and I was neither of those three. So before I got drafted, I decided I would enlist.
Alright, so you decided to enlist rather than get drafted.
Yes, I was probably going to be getting drafted pretty quickly, so I said I want to do what I want to do, so I enlisted.
Oh, okay, that's cool. So when you enlisted, did you go to like a specific fort to train?
Well, my first duty station was Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, California. From there I went to Camp Pendleton, California, which is about an hour south of Los Angeles. From there I went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. From Camp Lejeune I went back to Camp Pendleton for infantry training. And in September of '67 I shipped off to Vietnam.
So were you a Marine?
I was a Marine.
Okay. So when you were shipped off to Vietnam, did you know that you were gonna go there, or was it just like?
Yeah, no, I received my orders for Vietnam when I was at Camp Lejeune. So.
Okay. So how did you feel when you were on your way when you knew you were gonna go there?
Well, I didn't feel too bad because I was a Marine and all the Marines were going at the time. But I went over as a radio telegraph operator. I knew my telegraph key, and I thought I was going to be, as they say, as a radio telegraph operator. I knew my telegraph key, and I thought I was going to be, as they said, in the rear with the gear and the beer. But when I got to Vietnam, they told me I was going to go to 2nd Battalion, 26th Marine Infantry Regiment. And I told them, well, I'm a telegraph operator. And well, they said, well, you're going to be a radio operator now because we don't need telegraph operators. And the reason we need radio operators is because they're all getting killed. So they put me on a helicopter, and I didn't see daylight for another almost 13 months.
Wow. So what exactly does a radio
Well,
operator do?
and what I did, they have various duties. You can be in the rear as a radio operator, taking in messages and sending out messages from the command posts, or you can be with an infantry company as a radio man reporting missions and fire missions and stuff like that. Or in my case, the early part I was a radio man for a lieutenant with 81 mortars. We would go out with the infantry, and whenever we'd hit any problems, the lieutenant would have his coordinates, his map, and he would read the coordinates to me, and I would relay those coordinates to our 81 mortars pits, and they would fire wherever we asked them to fire at, whatever coordinates.
Okay. So you would relay the coordinates to the mortar teams,
Yeah.
and they would fire on them. Okay. So remind me again, what year did you arrive in Vietnam?
September the 16th, 1967.
And how did you feel when you got there? Like, how was the whole thing to you?
Well, it was kind of like a movie scene. You train, you have all those little training exercises before you go over. But once you land there, it's like being on a movie set. All of a sudden, you see the camouflage airplanes, the camouflage helicopters, and then you see all the sandbags and all the sandbag pits, and you realize you're in a war zone.
Yeah.
And you kind of ask yourself, what did I get myself into?
Yeah. Wow. So what specific location did you arrive at?
I landed in Da Nang, which was the main port for the Marines to land at. From Da Nang, I went to Phu Bai. From Phu Bai, we went to a place called Khe Sanh that's in all the history books during the siege of January to April of '68. From there, we went to Con Thien, Camp Carroll, place called LZ Margot, Quang Tri, Don Ha. They were all, but Vietnam was divided into 4 areas. The northernmost area, which was the closest to the North Vietnamese and the militarized zone, the DMZ, was 1, and then you go all the way down to 4 in the Mekong Delta. So we were in Area 1.
So was Area 1 considered like the most hostile part?
Yeah, in Area 1, any Vietnamese was the enemy.
Really?
Where
Wow.
further south, you worked in the villages and the towns, but where we were at, we called it Indian country.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. So did you have like specific missions? that you were
Yeah,
assigned?
I think in my almost 13 months there, I participated in about 8 or 9 operations.
Wow.
The longest being at Quezon. We were there from January, I believe, the 10th until about the middle of April.
Wow.
But I had some other smaller ones, and probably that was really dangerous. We lost a lot of men. But probably the most dangerous one was the last one I participated in. I can't remember the name of it. Operation Scottsdale, Truesdale, I believe. That was pretty close to the border of Laos, I believe.
Oh, wow. So could you remind me how many months were you in Vietnam?
I was there 12 months and 20 days. See, the Army was only there, the Air Force, Navy, they only served 12 months, but the Marine Corps served 12 months and 20 days, simply because in the early part of the war, 65, 66, they used to take you over on ships, and it would take the ship 20 days to get over there. So once you got there, you would serve a full 12 months and then come back. But when we started going over in 66, 67, 68, 69, they would fly you over. So it'd take you about a week, but they would still count your tour as 12 months and 20 days. And a lot of people got killed during those last 20 days,
Really?
including me almost.
Wow. So could you tell me like a little more about the operations?
Operations, whenever the higher ups detected any enemy movement, whether he was in the jungles or wherever, whatever infantry company was near there, they were the ones who would go out and...
Sorry about that. So we were at operation.
Yeah, operations, whenever the higher ups detect any enemy movement, whatever infantry battalion or squad or platoon is near, they would normally send them out on operation. Operations can last from 1 day to 3, 4, 5, 6 months. It all depends on what was out there.
Okay. So in your opinion, what do you think were your most memorable operations?
Well, Quezon, because that was Operation Scotland, I believe. More because it was just so, it was all over the newscast in the evenings. It was all over Time Magazine, Newsweek. Basically what it was during TED, right before TED, where a large amount of enemy movement was on the detectors was noticed. I'm talking about like 20,000 men. So they sent the whole battalion out there, 26th Marine Infantry Battalion, to stop that movement, and that happened to be